I am your African history teacher, Professor Hicks, and trying to get all my apparatuses in order here so we can get started and get through this lesson today. And of course, we're back here to continue our discussion on the Pequot Indian Native American and the Colonist War, known as the Pequot War or the Mystic Massacre. Take your pick. See if I can just shrink this a bit for the time being. Okay, so I can see me a little better. Thank you, folks, for hanging with me through this. So there's a lot going on, as you know, in our country, and our king is still doing his thing. And I want to say, I can't say Happy Thanksgiving. My conscience does not allow me to say that because most of the people of the Pequot ancestry, or should I say descendants, who are still living, find Thanksgiving and as a day of mourning. Yes, as a day of mourning. And maybe after you hear our story today, you might believe it should be so as well. Yes, the Thanksgiving is a mourning for many Native people, and for us, it's a celebration. I don't really think if most of us understood the nature, the complexity, and the horror of this particular day, Thanksgiving Day as it's known, and the Pequot Wars, I don't really think many of us would be in the celebratory mood for this, okay? Because it's truly horrific. All right, so with that said, there's a little current event. So our king has been a little busy lately. His seems to be in a little bit of trouble. I don't know. He's kind of like Teflon Don. He deflects a lot of this stuff. As we know, the Epstein files are still percolating, and I think we're waiting for some release from the Department of Justice. I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm trying to stay focused on what I have to do here. But I know one thing: he took a bath in the midterms, or should we call it a tsunami? House members are threatening to leave the party, which would change the balance of the Congress and give the Democrats an upper hand. And most important of that, get rid of Mr. Mike Johnson. All right, he is the leader of the Senate and the House of Congress, I should say, and I'm sure the Democrats will be glad to get rid of him. And we're also getting some pushback from veterans in regards to the president threatening sedition and murder of 6 Democratic lawyers, formerly of the armed services, who have voiced their opinion or should I say, given general legal information to veterans who are not veterans, but presently armed members, that they have to be loyal to the Constitution and not the king. The Constitution and not the king. Those orders, based on what I'm hearing and understanding, that those are legal. That's a legal advice. Even all officials take a oath to the Constitution before they take an oath to the president or anyone else. So we'll see where that goes. I think this is the wrong. Tree for the president to be barking up, because there's no wins in that. Not legally. There's no wins in it at all. I mean, in your base, you pretty much lost your base, and a lot of people agree with that. They shouldn't have armed services members incarcerating, kidnapping, and detaining people on the streets, citizens, that is. So we'll see where that goes. Also, our prayers are with Sudan, a subject I have been very, very sensitive to take on, but I'm going to say my piece today, and that is the genocide and the massacre and starvation of the Sudanese people. Here we go again. On my lifetime, this is the second time I've had to even entertain or, just to think about this. It's a horrible situation. Unfortunately, it's not getting any we're not getting any attention from the mainstream media, and even some of the social platforms are not as strong as I would think they would be. Maybe it's going to come as more information seeps out. But it appears that the UAE the same very people that sponsor many of the events that are enjoyed and engaged by black people. That is basketball and boxing, for what I can see. And it seems to be that the UAE are being suggested to those who are behind this Islamic invasion in Sudan. Now, I'm not sure if it's an invasion or it's a fight between two factions, but whatever it is ugly and it's horrific. People are dying and starving. There's visual of people being murdered right in the deserts. And we need to focus on this, black folks, particularly if this is the same group that is sponsoring all the events that we partake in. I've watched basketball tournaments of recent with these wonderful outfitted basketball courts, beautiful. And every time I hear that they're being sponsored by the UAE, and if this is so, we need to be aware of this, folks. So stay aware, keep your eyes open, ears open, and let's make sure we support our people, okay? And with that said, I think I've come enough of my news report. But we must remember, folks, that we are African people, and it's important that we stay vigilant and aware. There's so many things going on at the same time, but we must not forget our focus, and that should be in the betterment of our people, the informing of our people, the protection of our women. This is what should be our focus, and please just stay focused. I do. All right, and so where do we leave off? Well, we left off talking about the Pequot War, and its relationship to Thanksgiving. So all you guys about to cook these wonderful meals, I hope I don't destroy it for you. I'm not trying to do that. All I would like to do is just raise your consciousness about these wars. My family's used to meet every 4th of July and these types of holidays, particularly when they're surrounded by, wars and conflicts, because the American history timeline is dotted and characterized by wars. Yeah, we're one of the few countries that our history is told through wars and timelines of war. And when I taught history in high school, that's what we did. It's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. But it also tells you something about our country and what we have been doing for the last 250 something years. And that is engaging in wars. How many people are aware right now that the Russians are in the Caribbean with big, massive guns and on ships? And of course, we have a buildup in the Caribbean as well. All right. And this buildup is also based on something we're going to talk about today. Why? Why are they there? If this was 40 years ago with the President Kennedy and they had the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were about to send nuclear weapons. We're about to be a nuclear war. So why are the Russians there today? Well, for some of the same reasons we always are in trouble as a country, and that's called expansionism, domination, and control. And our present target seems to be Venezuela, and they seem to not be taking it. The countries are, as particularly the international companies as well as the Caribbean countries, have now, because of our neglect with them, have now joined arms or become palsy-wowsy with many of the people who are so-called enemy, namely China, Russia. Who did I miss? We seem to pick the wrong fights. Venezuela is no problem. We should not be there, and hopefully we don't go in. But talking about expansion, domination, control, it brings us to our present lesson, because this is exactly what's happening in 1636. I should say from back to about 1630 till about 1638. We have the Europeans attempting this same strategy in the northeast, or should I say the southeast England area. That's where I focus on. This area also has been very, very populated by what I would call the Afro-Native tribes. The Afro-Native tribes. Yes, many of our ancestors who were here in America first. Remember, don't forget our topic from weeks ago. Africans were the first Americans here. The first ones. And when the Mongoloid Indians or natives, as you call them today, Native Americans, came over in 3000 BC, we were here. And they intermingled. They were able to continue to come over here in droves and sometimes in 10,000 at a time because they came through a land bridge where we came here by water. And as you can fathom and figure out logically, it is easier to move through land or by land than come from water. As a result, our ancestors that were here pretty much changed their complexion through intermingling over time and began to look more and more like they do today. But they still look like us, and they looked like us back then. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that in a couple of moments. All right, let me just see if we're on track here. Trying to keep my time down. As you guys know, we're already at the 10-minute mark and haven't even gotten started yet. I also have some slides for you. Let me just make sure they're working properly. All right, and I want you to see, we're going to kind of slide through this. No pun intended. And I want you to see some more images. Just 2 images today, but I'm going to have like I'm going to stretch the screen out. And so for your purposes, for later on, you want to go back to this. And I'm going to have a document slideshow as well with some of the things that we're going to talk about. Then I'm going to go and finally go into a discussion, some detail about this war, some of the things that I'm not going to be mentioned or cannot mention in the slideshow, but that we should know. Okay? All right. Let me get first things first. Get set up here. And I hope many of you I'm sure that many of you are going to have some great meals tomorrow, and I just want to, no matter what it is, I don't think many of us celebrate Thanksgiving anyway when we sit down to eat. Now, I'm not saying all of us, but I never think about Thanksgiving. When I had time off before I retired, I just think about eating. So I want you tomorrow to think about these Native people who lost their lives because of this celebration, which they call a mourning. And at some time tomorrow, take a little moment out and mourn and take mourning for the tragedy that Thanksgiving is given its name for. All right, so good afternoon, family, and Ashe. And before we begin, I would like to bring some context and focus to our going on discussion about the Pequot War and the Declaration of Independence, which leads us to the forming of the United States. Now, don't forget, my whole series, this will be going on up until July. Why? Because in July, you're going to celebrate, whether you want to or not, it's going to be in your face, the semi-quincentennial, which celebrates 250 years of the Union, or the Declaration of Independence, I should say more better. All right, because the country has been around, believe it, a little longer. But this is what this particular celebration is for. So, so our ongoing discussion about the Declaration of Independence and leads us to the forming of our United States. For context, the Pequot War is based on the same principles of the American Revolution. And my studies have led me to believe that that focus was on expansion, domination, and control. Yes, expansion, domination, and control. The focus is to understand that the stated principles of the Declaration of Independence, which are, as you guys know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property, is a byproduct. That life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is a byproduct of the expansion, domination, and control. Yes, not saying that the early founding fathers were not trying to pursue some sort of liberty and freedom from something. Yes, we understand taxation without representation. Yes, we understand encroachment in your quarters with British troops. Yes, we understand the prohibiting of trading with other European powers. Okay, we kind of get a little bit of that. But that was not what these rich, elite, founding fathers, mostly racist white men, were after. And you, those who are sitting down tomorrow, must be able to make that connection. They were after these three terms again, and you will hear them a lot today. That was expansion of their territories, of their land, expansion of their land into native land, domination of the economic activity that allowed these natives for centuries to have that land, and then finally control of everybody, and not just the natives, but everyone. These things are stated in the Declaration of Independence and I mean the pre-writing, I should say, when they wrote, as they wrote, the things that they left out of the Declaration, the things they suggested. A lot of stuff got thrown in the garbage. But they said that they want Hamilton himself wrote in to have a president for life and a Congress for life. Yes, Hamilton. Jefferson wrote something similar. So they didn't have any idea or think about you and me, black or white. This is so important to understand this about this American Revolution, Declaration of Independence, and subsequently forming of the United States. The elites are in control, wanted to maintain control. They were that way then, and they are that way, and they are this way. They are that way today. For the context, the Pequot War is based on these three principles. The focus is to understand that the stated principles of the Declaration of Life was not life-limiting pursuit of happiness, but that was just a byproduct. The expansion of native lands, the domination of all resources, and control of the average people, just as it is today. We, as free as we think we are not as free as we can be, I should say, and are. As for the Pequot War, we should keep in mind that these are our people. Yes. The images that I go through over the last 2 weeks and those that I've been seeing over the last 20 years suggest that these Pequot people and all the Indians, or as you call them Indian, but native and indigenous people along the southern eastern seaboard of the United States, that's Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, and such places, were dominated by black phenotypical looking tribes that they call Native Americans, that I call indigenous people. Remember, they had mixed by this time, so just think about a Mongoloid or Chinese looking person turning black, maybe with a different nose, but still very long, straight hair, but now filled with melanin and having black phenotypical features. We should keep in mind that these people are our people, or we are cousins. Based on some of the slides I've shown already, I showed you slides. You can go back to the site and take a look. And based on the slides, you have to be out of your mind not to see that these people are like us, and they were us. We must consider how the racist Europeans reclassified indigenous people. Yes, took their names, put someone else's name, said you are now Native Americans and you are now slaves because they look so much like us. These people then took ownership of our culture and history and names and became, as we know them today, the Native Americans. Their pheno and racial phenotype. In our previous discussion on broadcast, we talked about, when I was doing the first Americans were Africans, we had a lengthy discussion. And we went into genetics as it relates to the phenotype and how genetics structures your phenotype. We went into biology. We went into anthropology. And we also capped it off with archaeology, showing the bones, the cranial structures. This is no doubt, this is no longer an argument. And as one of the great historians said the other day, that there will be no books in the 20th century written doubting this anymore. Yes, the old books might have, but you can't anymore. Not and be published and not be able to have evidence. They ain't going to do it. The publishing houses are not going to do it. They lose money. So the first Americans were African, and as it relates to the phenotype, many of the southeastern native, the Algonquin, the Lenape, the Yamasee, and the Pequot our focus for today, share similar phenotypes of present-day African Americans. Yes. One of the slip-ups with the white racist regimes of that day and today was their historical descriptions of the natives in books and documentary, as I point out. I was sitting with my wife the other day watching a documentary, and they come with some native people, and they're just showing them like, now, honey, look how dark and black that guy's blacker than you. Native Mongoloid native people from Asia did not come over here looking like that. How? He had the epicatral foe. This native had long straight hair, blacker than me, and the nose and the lips. Not the lips so much, but the nose. As the books, as the slides I showed you point this out well. When discussing runaways, right, in these books, when these white racists discuss runaways and the selling of native, they fail to make distinctions as to how a slave who ran away to another tribe was able to hide. Yes. See, when you have a sickness, when you have a pathology and you have it, and you forget that that's same pathology affects you too. Though you're infecting everyone else with it, you're infected by it too. So when these intellectuals who write these books and make these documentaries, they think we're so dumb, or they're just so ignorant and arrogant that they make the distinction. They show the picture, so they fail to make a distinction of how a slave who ran away to another tribe was able to hide amongst them or be adopted by them. Because if you're a slave catcher, you're going to go say, oh, that's John, right there, go get him. But if John looks like native John Coco or native Ulatuwaha'a, how are you going to tell them apart? Folks, use your brains. They don't want you to have this information for whatever reason I don't have time to go into today. How were they able to hide amongst them and it look like them? How? Because they look just alike. Now, finally, you want to hear a lot about these people being sold into slavery. The Pequot was sold into slavery by the hundreds. Sold to where? British islands in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, yes, and Barbados. Well, if you know anything of just a small thing about Caribbean slave history, slave masters there did not take you unless you were able to work in the sun. And they would be very, very, very aware of buying a product that they know that couldn't last in the sun. Why would they bring someone of a lighter skin, looking like a mongoloid, over there to work in the sun? You know he wouldn't last a day. So the same selling of the native to Caribbean islands, unless the buyer of this or slaver recognized the native to be African, and by the way, Africans were valued above all others due to their being able to tolerate the Caribbean working conditions, mostly of the sun. And that merchant who's making that purchase is going to know if that's a Native American or an African. He, like the one who's selling, can't tell the difference because they're the same. He would not accept any less property. Unfortunately, we have to look at these slip-ups and documentations because the white racist biographers and documentarians and such must hide and repress this information in order to be published, first of all, and to keep the public misinformed. Let's listen to a short audio by a great young man who does great work with our people.
Let me ask you a question the textbooks can't answer. Historians say runaway slaves hid with the Indians. Cool. But how does a dark-skinned people magically hide with a group that supposedly looked nothing like them? Let's bring the receipts to court. Spanish, French, and British explorers described the original indigenous as Negro-like, guinea-colored, black, and Ethiopian. Not me saying it, they said it. 1705, Virginia Code grouped Negro, Mulatto, and Indian under the same laws. Maryland and the Carolinas did the exact same thing. Why? Because they couldn't tell us apart. Seminole, Yamasee, Guale, Creek, Timucua, Apalache. They were dark. Spanish priests described them with wool hair, broad features, deep brown skin. That's why runaway Africans didn't blend in. They blended in because they were the same people. Once the government created the one-drop rule, Dawes rolls and Walter Plecker's race codes, the dark indigenous got relabeled as Negro, and the lighter groups became Native American. That's the real disappearing act. So no, we didn't hide with the natives. We were the natives. The only thing that got lost was the paperwork. They didn't hide, they were reclassified.
So I thought I'd give you that little piece of information because this gentleman, and that's a wonderful site. I gave the name. He's been around for quite some time, and he does great. He goes by Darnell, and you can find him on Facebook. He does a great job with documentation. I mean, good documentation. I know because as an educator and going to school to learn this stuff so I could teach it to students and to people, I know that his stuff is on. It's absolutely on. So very good. All right, so let's move into our slideshow today. All right, and let's see. What I'm going to do here is 26 seconds have already fine. We're going to get to the slideshow, and then we're going to talk a little more about, in detail about this Pequot War. But before we do that, let's see if I can put my head down. And as I told you folks, so I'm getting better with this. I'm not that great. I don't want to make you dizzy. All right. I think I got it. I don't want to make myself dizzy. And I'm glad you're right here watching me. You know, that's one thing about me. I don't mind, man. I don't mind being wrong, and I don't mind not knowing, and all that stuff. This always seemed to benefit me to be this way, and I have. I don't mind saying I made a mistake. I try not to tell lies ever. So, you know, I can share this operation with you as I walk through it. And because this is more for you, not for me. All right, so we're going to try to get through all of this within the next 20 minutes. I'm trying not to stay on as long as I do. Because I know that the attention span for many of us is not really that long. It's for me as well. And also I know that you know, people are not spending 20 the hour reading, but I hope they are. So let's go to this. So the motivation of the colonial expansion. We talked about expansion. The motivation of colonial expansion as relates to Captains John Underhill and John Mason and Governor Winthrop of the 1600 or 1630s was taking Indian land. And this same focus is used 50 years later to break up these, or should I say, to break up our relationship with the mother country, England. The same motivations, expansion. The Europeans who presently live, who I should say were then at the time living on the eastern seaboard of Connecticut, let's say particularly, these colonists wanted the lands of the Native Americans. And not only that, but they wanted to take over their means of living. They wanted to take their culture. They just wanted everything in control. Of course, they already have of slaves and poor whites and women and blacks, of course. And of course, I mentioned the slaves. And as you can see here in this demonstration of a war scene, they were on this scene. You can see the natives kind of winning here because this represents one of the native raids that was taking place. And there were native raids. And because in order for the natives to protect their winter stores, the food that they would need for the winter, after declaring war was declared between them and the colonists, they would attack these colonists in their particular domains where they were, because colonists were always known to ravage the stores of Native Americans. So that's just one of the reasons why you might see an image like this. And of course, of course, many of these European settlers had no respect for native culture or customs. All right, so let's move through this. And here's a gathering right here. This is a gathering of the soldiers about to go on one of their, should I say, what would they be? Campaigns. Yes, war campaigns. All right, this is Pequot. This is Connecticut. We're talking about Mystic, Connecticut. This is where this horrible tragedy took place. And here's a Native American from the Pequot, honoring his ancestors, honoring Mother Nature, as we all did back then. And this is the attack on the Pequot fort. Now, this is another thing we need to do to separate some of the native from indigenous. The Native Americans in the eastern seaboard, in this particular place, Pequot, had long houses made of wood. They didn't live in teepees. You might have seen a teepee erected amongst them, but that wasn't, as you can see here. But if you look in the background, you see the forts. They lived mostly in forts built with wood and palisades around them. So that's one of the distinctions from those more nomadic Native Americans who were on the West Coast, okay? And I've been dying to show you this photo. Here's a Pequot. Look at that sister. I wish I could just keep her there, man. Look at her. Look at the phenotype. Look at still with the epicantrophe fold, like she had Chinese in her. Then you'll move down to the nose. The nose look like most African American noses. Oh yeah. Now today sisters are doing weaves and stuff to get their hair like that. But this is a Native American here. This is a Pequot, a descendant of the Pequot. And this is her baby. Look at that gorgeous baby. They look just like us. She could be living in the South Bronx. Who knew? Or who knows? All right, so let's get this into focus. The Pequot Massacre and creation of Thanksgiving. The Pequot Massacre, also known as the Mystic Massacre, one of the most violent and decisive events in early colonial indigenous history. By the 1630s, tension in New England were extremely high between the Pequot Nation and the English settlers. Powerful indigenous people controlling the trade along the southeastern coast were the Pequot Nation. The English had established colonies in the Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, and the Connecticut colonies, and they sought Pequot lands and control of the wampum trade. Now, the wampum is beads-like, and these beads are symbolic. These beads are for memories. These beads are for training, and these beads are for beauty and aesthetics. These beads were what we would call today our money. They were the currency for the native people. In order for the Europeans who are arriving now, Dutch first, then English, Dutch first, and then English, they have to control this trade if they're going to make any profits whatsoever. And they also going to have to control the fur trade, because the Indians are the best hunters and they know how to produce these furs. So this is the first point of contention. Now, Chief Sassacus is a Sachem, Sachem, and that simply means he's a chief. And he was a big-time chief in this area, and he was sensing the tension. So he tried to win other native allies and prevent, like the Mohicans and the Narragansett, from siding with the English. The Pequot leaders were many of them were away negotiating deals with other tribes, trying to get help, because they did understand that the English had guns. None of the native tribes expected what English would unleash. They did not have any idea of this type of war, and they had not been familiar with this type of war. And later noted, these wars by the English were called total wars. We'll see what that is. The English knew that they could not fight an all-out war with the natives due to the natives' superior numbers. But the Pequot Wars, always up until this point, when they did fight, native against native mostly, they took and captured enemies. You became a slave to that particular tribe. Now, not in the sense of chattel slavery, ownership. No, you might be able to move up if you had skills in that particular tribe that captured you. Taking warriors, adding more warriors to your clan. Ritual combat, where you might get one guy who's strong and another Indian from another tribe is strong, and those two, instead of having all out wars, but they fight each other, and the winner wins the battle. Everyone goes home. And the other thing was limited destruction. They did not come out to destroy the structural community of other native people. Remember that this is the first time they're having these wars with Europe or Europeans. The Narragansett and the Mohegans, who were rivals of the Pequot and sometimes allies of the English. The conflict escalated after a series of killings involving traders, disputed trade routes, and colonial expansion into Pequot territory. By 1636, colonists declared war on the Pequot. Now, there was a bunch of conflicts we're not going to go into right now that escalated these tensions, and it was ongoing. Most of them were created, started, and settled by the European settlers. On May 26, 1637, was the day of the massacre. Near present-day Mystic, Connecticut, a combined force of English soldiers led by Captain John Mason and John Underhill, and hundreds of native allies, primarily Narragansett and Mohegan warriors, surrounded and attacked the fortified Pequot village. The village, mostly occupied by women, children, and the elderly, an estimated 500 to 700 inhabitants. The English forces set fire to the encircled village, and as the Pequot people ran from the burning forts, they were shot, stabbed, or forced back into the flames. Those trying to escape through openings were cut down. Within about 1 hour, nearly the entire community was dead. Only a small number escaped into the woods. Very few were taken prisoners. This, folks, happened at every fort that the Pequot were in. This war spread amongst to all the communities. Warriors were often out scouting and protecting other scattered Pequot villages. That's why the Europeans knew when to go in. They timed it for that. Unlike the nomadic natives of the southeast, Pequots had multiple fortified settlements made of wood. Some of these settlements were further inland, and the main fort was Chief Massacre's settlement. Pequot forces were near rivers to watch the Dutch and English movement. So while they were out watching the Dutch, or maybe the Dutch were feigning military movements, these warriors, and some of the best warriors, would leave their settlements, thereby making it much easier for the civilians to be attacked. Remember, Native Americans had a different concept of war. It was the warriors against the warriors. That was pride. You're fighting someone who is just as bad as you, and you're able to take pride if you happen to defeat that enemy. So preparing, while they were out, these high-placed warriors were preparing and defending for the small villages to intercept the English patrols. This meant that the Mystic Village at this time had a high population but a low warrior site. Most of the Pequot warriors were not inside the villages, as we just said, when the English attacked. There's a major reason the English were able to wipe out, or this was a major reason why the English were able to wipe out entire communities of women, children, and elderly so quickly. Many of the Pequot warriors were away on raiding or scouting missions. In the spring of 1637, Pequot warriors were actively engaged in raids against the English and other towns, scouting English movements around the Connecticut River, specifically where their traditional hunting grounds were. Scouting also helped the Pequot protect its food supplies and trade routes. Yes, there were trade routes leading from the coast into the inlands, into the interior. These routes had to be kept secret by natives so that they will not be co-opted by anybody else. Food in this particular time was kept in storages, sometimes underground. Because remember, there were longer winters than there were summers. Because of this, large groups of Pequot fighters were not in the Mystic Fort the night of the English attack. Most of the warriors of the native tribe did not attack native combatants. Let me say that again. Most warriors of native tribes did not attack native combatants. They did not expect that the English would attack civilians. Surrounding the villages at night and setting it on fire, shooting and stabbing people as they ran out, they did not expect this type of war, which they called total war. Some of the Indians even quoted, even the Pequot traditional enemy said, "It is too furious and slays too many." As many of the natives were horrified, even those allies, because many of these groups who were anti-Pequot, like the Narragansett and the Mohicans, they joined with the settlers, these British/American settlers. Yes, they became the enemy of the Pequot. John Mason and John Underhill, these were the captains. They waited until the warriors had left. Remember, I said this already, kind of being redundant here, but trying to drive the point home. They left and attacked at dawn when most natives in the forts were still asleep. The English sought to destroy, completely eliminate Pequot power by killing the civilians. This type of war was very new to Native Americans. Captain John Smith described the scene proudly, called the Massacre a victory because the fire had consumed them all. Puritan leaders later said that destruction was the will of God. After the massacre, English forces hunted down the surviving Pequot villagers. Hundreds of captives, mostly women and children, were enslaved in New England, the West Indies, or given to native allies. How could they hide? How could they go? Other natives took them in because they looked alike. The enslaving of the Pequot suggested racial phenotype was very much the same as African people. Darker-skinned natives were listed in colonial census records as Negroes, like Guinea, colored, black, or Ethiopian. And then the lighter-skinned natives were called Native Americans. This is how the replacement of our people began. Of course, there's a treaty that follows. You know, the Europeans are always known for their treaties that they break. The Treaty of Hartford outlawed the name of Pequot, forbidding survivors from using it. Yes, total extermination. Like the Tasmanian over there in Australia. None left. Total, complete extermination of a people. This is what these British/American colonists wanted. The massacre broke up the Pequot military power and shifted regional dominance to who? The English. This signaled that the English warfare against the native would target civilians as a strategy of terror. Even the Narragansett were horrified by the scale of the killings. By outlawing the Pequot name, colonists made full erasure of a people and preventing any future claims to these lands, as present-day Mohegans were able to claim lands for their casinos. After English colonists and their allies burned the Pequot villages, killing hundreds of men and women, the Puritan leadership of Massachusetts Bay Colony declared a day of Thanksgiving. They declared a day of Thanksgiving after slaughtering women, children, and old people. Remember, the warriors who could fight, they avoided them. This day was meant to celebrate the destruction of the Pequot nation. Governor John Winthrop wrote that a day of Thanksgiving was ordered on July 1637 to celebrate the victory over the Pequot. Colonists openly described the massacre as a sign of God as they sat and ate. This is what they talked about. This was the first recorded English Thanksgiving Day associated with a major event in New England's history. Throughout the Pequot War from 1636 to 1638, several additional Thanksgiving days were proclaimed, each tied to a military victory over native people. Folks, these were not the harvests that you see with the turkeys and these were celebrations of conquest. Please stop it. Understand, if you're going to eat that turkey tomorrow, understand, eat it in mourning. Eat it, enjoy it, but eat some of it in mourning and understand that this Thanksgiving Day, this connection, that's why Thanksgiving Day was able to be shifted and turned. Every native victory during this time, every colonist victory during this time celebrated a Thanksgiving. After this one, there was about 4 or 5 more. There were a few that I read about, I remember years ago when I was teaching this in high school, where they took the sachem, the chief, they took his head and they kicked it around as a recreational period after eating. Then they would take the head and stick it back on a pole and leave it there as a way to intimidate all the other natives that were living about. Remember, natives and the colonists lived in the same communities, intertrade, walk. You might, if you were there today and you were walking by, you might see a native walk by with his wife or whatever. And there you will see your leader's head sticking on a pole or being kicked around. By this time, your people were subjugated if you were a native or indigenous person. Okay? All right. Now you get an idea of your Thanksgiving dinner. I hope I didn't spoil it for you. We've been on now 46 minutes, a little longer than I will. I'm going to come back to you probably on Friday, and I'm going to conclude this war and give you the details, some of the gory details. This is kind of just an overview of what this war was, and that should take about 30 minutes. And to further horrify you, I should say, but it's not about horrifying. It's about understanding the truth. Remember, we're trying to get up to why we have a Declaration of Independence. These events help push the path to independence. When we finish with this, we're going to go to Black resistance. Black resistance during the Revolutionary period and before. And certain events that led up to the Declaration of Independence. What our roles were. And how that some of the incidents that occurred. What led us to our or their independence? What part did we have to take in this Revolutionary War? Quickly, I watched a segment today on the American Revolution by Ken Burns, and not one time they talked about the loyalists who fought against the American patriots, but not one time did they mention the Ethiopian Brigade. They talked about every type of loyalist. They had all types of wonderful names for them. These were the people that fought with the British against the Americans. They were living here in America. They decided not to support the revolution and independence. They wanted to keep England as their parent company. Well, they fought too. And some of them went and fought with the British. Well, there was a guy named Lord Dunmore who set out a proclamation. Now, I don't want to give all of it away now, but you should have studied it in school. But they had a group of black men called the Ethiopian Brigade. They kicked some butt against these patriots who were trying to enslave them. I would have been a part of that brigade. I would not have said, if someone said to me, if you come over to my side, we're going to give you freedom. I'm sure there's not many people who wouldn't have done the same thing. But not one mention of it today in Ken Burns' documentary. Maybe later on. I'm at number 4. I get 2 more to go. Hopefully he does. In any case, we've been here a pretty long time today. And I'm going to say to you, Ashe, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening.